From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Germany and the United States finally decide to send Ukraine battle tanks as Kyiv prepares for what could be a new Russian offensive in the coming months. What has changed and how much will these tanks matter? Plus, Mike Pence, former vice president, discloses that classified documents were found at his Indiana home. He's cooperating with the National Archives and Congress, but does anybody take care of secrets in Washington, D.C. anymore? Or are we simply, maybe, keeping too many things secret? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, and I'm here with Joe Sternberg and Kate Batchelder Odell to talk about these two pressing subjects. Let's start with Joe in London. You follow German politics closely. What finally turned German Chancellor Olaf Scholz around on sending what I guess is going to be 14 Leopard tanks to Ukraine after so many months of resisting?
What turned it was pressure, an awful lot of pressure both within Germany and from outside. So, first off, what was going on outside of Germany is that there was a lot of pressure from Ukraine asking for these tanks, and there was increasing pressure from Germany's allies. I think that you could detect, especially in recent weeks, and in the run-up to the conference or summit that a bunch of people had held at the Ramstein Air Base last week, growing exasperation with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's refusal to give any ground on the tanks. And I think that Berlin came to feel that pressure from allies very keenly, and a special form of pressure was coming from Poland, which owns its own stock of German-made Leopard tanks, technically would require Olaf Scholz's permission to re-export any of those tanks to Ukraine, as the Polish government wanted to do.
That's part of the contract, right, Joe? That was part of the contract in purchasing them, yeah.
That is part of the contract, but Poland had formally requested the permission to re-export some of its tanks to Ukraine, and then was starting to make noises threatening that it might export them anyway, even if it didn't get the permission. And I think that that would have created a major diplomatic problem between Warsaw and Berlin that Scholz was keen to head off. And finally, there was huge domestic pressure, because I think that actually the idea of the tank shipments had become very popular across most of the mainstream political parties in Germany, including parts of Olaf Scholz's own center-left Social Democratic Party. And I think that they reached the point where he just could not resist all of this internal and external political and diplomatic pressure anymore.
And Kate, this is announced coincident with the United States on Thursday announcing that it is going to send 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Now, it isn't clear yet from the announcement when these will be delivered, but it appears that they aren't going to come next Thursday, that's for sure. They're going to be not from current stocks, but will be contracted to build, it appears, in the coming months. But the U.S. had to change its mind, too, on this. And for months they said, well, these are complicated tanks. They rely on jet fuel, hard to get to, hard to maintain, hard to train. Do you credit those arguments?
Well, Paul, I think we're watching the same story play out that we've seen on so many other weapon systems, including Patriot missile defenses, where for a long time, the Biden administration talks in the press about just how it can't be done. We'd love to do it, but there's too much training, too complicated. Just can't do it. And then they will float in the press, well, we're thinking about doing it now. And then weeks later, we'll announce, we'll give Ukraine a Patriot battery, for instance, and we'll bring Ukrainian troops to Oklahoma to learn how to use the Patriot. So I don't think it makes the U.S. look like a world leader that we continue to have this same process of throwing out all these objections and then later abandoning them. On the narrow point of tanks, I think there are some, of course, logistical challenges with running tanks. Each of these tanks have their own maintenance ecosystem, require a lot of training to maintain them. But now we're 11 months into the war. We probably could have overcome that significantly sooner had we started earlier, and we've just lost time. To your point, there's an open question whether it looks as though these tanks are going to come out of procurement authority and not drawing down out of existing U.S. stocks. I think there would be reason to worry about that. The Marines have recently divested of their tanks, so we surely have some tank capacity from that. And it could take perhaps a year to get these Abrams tanks off the line and over to Ukraine. We've been talking on this podcast about why this spring is so essential for the Ukrainians and trying to regain some of the initiative. So I don't really see a year-long horizon for tanks as good news.
Well, that suggests that this decision by the U.S. is largely not intended to influence the battlefield other than to serve as cover, Joe, for the Germans and for Scholz, who made clear that he did not want to send the Leopards unless the U.S. also sent tanks. And I guess, does Scholz figure that he needed the cover of these tanks to sell this to his domestic coalition? The Germans are constantly telling us they don't want to be ruled by the Americans. But why in this case do they want American cover?
As far as I can tell, it's a weird form of psychological warfare that he is perpetrating against part of his own party here, because I think that certainly a lot of the nervousness among more pacifist Germans, including on the left, and remember Olaf Scholz, his party is the center-left Social Democratic Party, a lot of that, the concern from that camp with sending arms to Ukraine all along has been that Vladimir Putin would perceive this as escalatory and that it would prompt some kind of retaliation. I mean, the nightmare scenario that you often hear about in German discussions of these issues is some kind of nuclear retaliation from Russia. And from that has sprung this notion that it would only be safe for Germany to contribute to efforts like sending tanks if they were doing so in tandem with countries like the US. And so I think that this whole palaver over the Abrams tanks, to the extent that it's a diplomatic maneuver instead of a military one, is oriented toward giving Scholz an opportunity to say, hey, we Germans are not going it alone, which means that we will not be the only ones bearing the brunt of Putin's wrath. Now, I mean, don't take that German argument too seriously, because, I mean, certainly they, even without the Abrams tanks, if they had agreed to send the Leopards, they would have been doing it in concert with other European countries like Poland, Spain, Finland, who also want to be able to send Leopard tanks. So no one was ever going to accuse the Germans of going it alone in terms of military aid to Ukraine, but that is sort of the reality of the political argument that they were having in Berlin about this.
All right. On the larger military and political significance of the tank delivery, let's listen to Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina.
The Germans are now appreciating the moment. This dust-off over tanks will serve us well long term. And let me tell you why. Because it's now a realization by the United States and Germany that the goal is to help Ukraine evict Russia from Ukraine. That now is the goal. There is no off-ramp. The Ukrainians are not going to make it easy to end this war. So the fact that the tanks are going to flow from Germany and hopefully from America, to me, is something to celebrate, because it's an acknowledgement that the goal now is to be with Ukraine until every last Russian soldier is evicted from Ukrainian soil.
Well, Lindsey Graham is never shy about drawing large implications from events, Kate, and I don't think I agree with him on this point. Certainly, it's a significant event, the delivery of the tanks, and it's a significant event militarily for what could be a spring offensive on either side. But I don't think this suggests that either Germany or the Biden administration have decided that they're now going to support Ukraine taking back every inch of Ukrainian territory, especially Crimea, the peninsula which Russia invaded and annexed in 2014. I still sense in the reluctance to provide Abrams tanks and all the weapons that Ukraine wants, a sense that the Americans don't want Ukraine to lose, but they're still not sure if they want Russia to lose thoroughly. And I think that goes double for the Germans. What do you think?
Yeah, Paul, I mean, I would love to agree with Senator Graham there and would like to think this is a real turning point, but I'm not sure that we're seeing signs of that. I mean, the tank decision comes after a multi-week saga, a NATO meeting in Germany where nobody could agree on anything. And now here, so belatedly, we're finally going to send the tanks. So I don't know that we can call this a real change in U.S. policy, that we're really going to double down and give them what they need to win. I mean, keep in mind, they've been asking for the Army's tactical missile system, which you can put on their HIMARS rocket systems, and fire at much greater range, still not giving them that. There are other weapons that they want. They're probably going to ask for F-16s now. We're not really all in on this project yet. And I think, like I said about procuring Abrams versus finding a way to get them over much quicker is another symptom of that. And we've made the case in our pages that there's really no moral or strategic case for giving them just enough weapons to continue to take casualties, but not to prevail. And I think there's real reason to be concerned, especially as we are letting this narrow opening kind of pass here for them to retake some of the initiative. I think there's real concern that that's what we're doing.
The United States does want Ukraine to regain the offensive so it can negotiate from a position of strength if Russia decides finally it does want to negotiate in good faith. No signs of that yet.